benefits it provides. So I'll now move things along for the final segment of the presentation. I'll turn it over to my colleague, Asif Rahman. He's going to discuss other applications of the A3 system and what kind of common challenges can be overcome by using this technology. Asif?
Thank you, Tom. As Tom mentioned, my name is Asif Rahman. I'm with Weber Scientific. And I've had the privilege of working with the A3 system and ATP in general for the last few years. And more importantly, I've been able to work with one of our biggest market bases, which is dairy. Up until now, we've seen a major role that A3 technology has played in a brewery setting, but I'd like to shift the conversation and take a look at dairy in particular. Dairy is interesting for a few reasons. Not only is it a very heavily regulated industry, but the products themselves create some interesting challenges with regards to sanitation. With just the nature of dairy products with, kind of perfect pH, a lot of nutrients, it is a conducive environment for bacteria to grow in. So sanitation is critical within the dairy industry, and I'd really like to go over how A3 technology has overcome some of the big obstacles to the industry. So first, I'd like to kind of go over what are the major challenges, in the dairy industry. And I've really narrowed it down to 4 key obstacles in creating and maintaining a robust sanitation program. And these challenges are here on this slide. These are important concepts that not only dairy should focus on, but really all food and beverage. So first, let's talk about the basics, and more importantly, the attention to detail. Without a firm grasp on the basics of sanitation, on bacterial control, and evaluating procedures, sanitation programs fail to really evolve past what they were when they were first implemented. And sanitation challenges are dynamic. So it's important to create a sanitation program that's not only flexible, but can, enable you to respond quickly and easily to changes. And the basics really heavily tie into training. Without a strong knowledge of the basics behind maintaining a sanitary plant environment, how can others be trained? How can I, as a trainer, without a strong base knowledge, train others? I'm just kind of implementing some of the maybe bad habits or poor procedures that a new trainer or a new operator might carry out into the plant. And, we see things like basic concepts like sampling techniques, sampling frequency, risk assessments, they're not being considered when creating sanitation programs. And without evaluating these basic concepts, it's difficult to confirm the validity of results, and more importantly, it's almost impossible to respond to issues. We move on, to some of the assumptions that operators make within their plant environment. I mentioned before that sanitation challenges are dynamic. And one of the biggest issues that we see in dairy plants is that the assumption is that nothing is changing. You can trust that your CIP cleaning system is 100% effective 100% of the time, but what steps are you taking to verify that? Believing that plant conditions are static and unchanging is one of the worst assumptions you can make. And accordingly, it's a very large contributor to ineffective sanitation programs. The name of the game really is to trust but verify that things are running as they should be. And finally, we get into training and SOPs, which are very closely related. The operators and sanitarians that are performing sanitation and verification absolutely must have a firm understanding as to why they're doing what they're doing. It needs to be instilled in the operators that what they're doing has a greater implication to not only the food, but the business itself. And instilling a sense of continually accounting for changes within the plant environment that may lead to improvements in their sanitation protocols is critical. So I typically find that in the absence of written protocols, and sometimes even with written protocols, operators are performing these tasks differently. And a lot of root cause analysis for consistently failing sampling points oftentimes lead to uncovering the variances in how sampling is performed, and that's almost always. SOPs aim to remove these variances, but we'll take a look, later on as to how the Lumi tester response specifically, as well as the software that they include, aim to deal with each of these challenges. But first, I want to take a look at, what are some of the implications? What does all this mean? What are these challenges? What are they leading to? these challenges are fairly universal. There's no one challenge here that you can see, between basics, assumptions, training, and SOPs that are specific to the dairy industry. But we evaluate these challenges because of their relevancy to sanitation programs in general. So poor sanitation programs can really be indicative of a poor quality program. And this may negatively impact your product quality, your packaging, and even your shelf life. And I mentioned earlier, it's important for us to make a connection between what we're doing and why we're doing it. By creating and maintaining a strong sanitation program, we can obtain objective, quantifiable data that enables us to evaluate and improve sanitation practices and product quality. We'll take a look at, how do we overcome these challenges? We all know that ATP technology has been around for a long time. And just the last few years, we're seeing that not only the technology improving, but also how the data is handled, interpreted, and used to modify sanitation practices, it has been improving as well. On top of that, we're seeing some really, really advanced software suites, data handling programs, across the board. We're seeing a lot of, new, brands and manufacturers that are really, really, advancing their software suites and their capabilities. So take a look at this slide. It's kind of a little matrix of each of these obstacles, and take a look at some of the specific, points that. So we see that there are certain probing questions that are important to identify weaknesses in each area. So you may have weaknesses in more than one area, but without anything prompting you to actually examine these concepts, your sanitation program may never really evolve into something that's really meaningful. So it's important to take a look at these questions and ask yourself, is there more that we could be doing? Is there more that we should be doing? Over the next few slides, we're going to take a little bit of a deeper dive into each of these challenges. And more importantly, we'll take a look at how A3 technology and the software package that KIKKKOMAN has put together confronts these challenges. And on top of that, empowers you to maintain an efficient sanitation program. So let's take a look at the first concept, which is basic. So understanding that even solid concepts like sampling technique, they can have a really profound impact on your sanitation program. It's no surprise that things like sampling area, proper swab pressure, swab rotation, these are things that are susceptible to complacency, particularly when you're swabbing dozens or even hundreds of times per day. But what impact do these simple concepts like swab rotation and sampling pressure have on your results? Now, I want to bring up an example of a small ice cream manufacturer in New York that implemented A3 technology. Historically, this ice cream manufacturer had pretty substantial quality and sanitation issues. They're a small ice cream manufacturer, about 9 different flavors and fairly limited capacity. And they never really had a strong sanitation program. And more importantly, they relied primarily on visual inspection to make sure equipment is clean. And I think, for some of the folks that are working in food processing food, visual inspection can be a pretty dangerous game to play. So it was no surprise that they were the target of frequent state health audits, and they were really forced to implement more stringent sanitation practices. So on my first visit there, we swabbed absolutely everything we could. We found some key areas that needed attention. We created a testing program that resolved their issues. And about 9 months later, they started to get more failures in their third-party testing. After we sat down again and went through the program, it was very evident that not only did they cut down on some of the hotspots that we had previously identified, but a lot of operators were swabbing in less than a second and without any real pressure. And on top of that, they weren't even following the instructions in shaking the swab after reinserting it into the body. They were getting artificially low results based on improper sampling technique, which failed to capture a representative sample, and they fell victim to complacency. Take a look at the instructions that pop up before every single sample is taken. So you take a look at these simple concepts that, obviously are inherent for all ATP testing, but can be easily forgotten over time. The simple addition of these instructions before every sample is taken is critical in combating complacency and poor sampling technique. These instructions, they're here for a reason. They're here to reinforce proper sampling technique and to ensure the validity of your data. The ice cream producer that we just kind of talked about, they overcame these complacency issues by implementing the Lumi Tester Smart, and it strengthened their sampling technique and then enable them to capture more representative data. It may seem like a really minor addition, but having picture-based instructions is important to reinforce that proper sampling technique. These are subtle concepts that can get easily lost over time, and it can easily get lost with even employee turnover. There's not employees that have been grandfathered into a program that can teach other operators. You work with an Oregon-based dairy processor that implemented A3 technology, and they're a fairly good-sized dairy processor. They produce about 6 million pounds of product daily. So they're a good size. They had a very mature sanitation program, but unfortunately, they experienced some substantial employee turnover. What they did have was a very well-developed sanitation program that was created alongside the implementation of A3. Having these instructions before every sample not only reinforced proper sampling technique to these new employees and new operators, but it also facilitated new operators adopting the test. It allowed them to minimize transitionary errors with new employees. And again, this is something that is not something that maybe you can plan for, but at the same time, you can rest assured that new operators have that information of how to do a test properly before every single test. We take a look at the next concept, which are assumptions. Now, assumptions are a key challenge into maintaining an effective sanitation program. We took a look at some key assumptions before, but we dive a little deeper. We can see you can see some other assumptions that may threaten your sanitation program. Sampling plans is a very powerful tool in creating a comprehensive testing program. But plans certainly aren't unique to Lumi Tester Smart. But how these plans are set up, maintained, and how the data is utilized are key characteristics of successful data handling programs. And again, I mentioned before that we're seeing a lot of these, ATP meter manufacturers are really developing some sophisticated data handling programs and making it very easy for you to obtain data reliably. We take a look here at a few shots that the software suite that KIKKKOMAN has put together, is displayed. Now, these are taken straight from the app, and these are not edited in any way. So we have easily accessible, meaningful data to work off of to improve our sanitation program. Now, keep in mind the distinction here is we've obtained this data using A3 technology, but now it's up to operators and managers to effectively respond using this data. When we see an example of, we had an artisanal cheese manufacturer in upstate New York, and, we've seen before, if you recall, Mikio's part of the presentation is that ATP, ADP, and AMP combined versus ATP alone have different responses depending on the food type. Once the A3 meter was implemented and they were able to trend their data, they quickly saw their average ROU values go up. Now, this caused them to question the validity of their results and the new trends they were seeing, but not realizing that cheese responds differently to ATP-only tests. Once they revamped their sanitation protocols, they saw their average ROU value decrease over subsequent months, similar to what we saw with the Great Central Brewing case that Tom had gone over previously. And finally, we get into training and SOPs. Two obstacles I think that go hand in hand, but are closely related to both basics and assumption. It's not uncommon to see large variances in protocols between operators, but what does this mean? Inconsistency can really damage the validity of your results. So different operators running different ways, getting different results, can be indicative of poor training and or poorly maintained SOPs. So maintaining appropriate training programs and updated SOPs can minimize these variances. But what if we had a software suite that allows us to create a plan that minimizes these variances? So let's take a look at an example of a test point that we have in a plant environment, which is, we can see as a filler. So we can see here, a filler that's pictured. What we've described, in terms of a filler is pretty insufficient in determining an appropriate sample point. This may seem obvious, but some of you that may have some well-developed and mature sanitation programs may underestimate the number of plants that have sanitation programs that specify test the filler 3 times per day. Well, there's not a whole lot of specificity to it, but at the same time, this is what's in their SOPs that are not well developed. And this is a real world example that we're discussing right now. So I think what we need to do is obviously specify further. So we've gone to a more specific, meaningful test point. Closer to an appropriate sample point, but general testing guidelines call for a 4x4 surface area. So we need to specify even further to a meaningful sample point. And finally, here we get to a specific, meaningful test point, which gives us data worth examining. We went from filler to nozzle and identified one potential test point that can be incorporated to our sanitation program. But up until now, what we've been looking at are pictures of these sample points without realizing that can get lost pretty easily when you're just kind of conceptualizing. So what the KIKKKOMAN software has done is give you the ability to actually take a picture of the test point, and what you see on this screen is exactly what you would see in the app. So there's no guesswork, there's no misinterpretation based on quick comparison between the sample point in the plan and the actual sample point. Again, what you see here is what you would see during the test. We take a look at a Pennsylvania-based dairy that took this feature a step further. So the dairy plant had over 200 sample points identified and regularly tested. Once the LuniTester Smart was incorporated, these sample points were categorized and photographed, and their SOPs were updated to specifically mention and reference pictures of sample points within the LuniTester software. So they comment on not only heightened consistency, but also uncovering some serious flaws with regards to operator error with prior meters. So I want to take a look at, we take a look at some of the major challenges within the dairy industry. And again, I want to go back to what, I mentioned when I first started speaking, is that although I focus on dairy, these are challenges that are not exclusive to any food type. Maintaining an effective sanitation program and creating a culture that focuses on sanitation are not challenges exclusive to dairy, but to all food and beverage types. It's important to ask yourself these questions when evaluating your sanitation program as it stands. And more importantly, how can the shortcomings of your sanitation program be addressed by implementing A3 technology? We've gone over a number of topics today, including what ATP is, A3 technology and the chemistry behind it, practical implementation and application of A3 technology within a brewery setting, and some of the challenges behind creating an effective sanitation program. As Dr. Bate mentioned, that A3 technology incorporates testing for all 3 adenolates, resulting in extremely high sensitivity to bacterial residue. Not only that, but the software suite created by KIKKKOMAN also lends to a more comprehensive sanitation program. By incorporating features that directly address major obstacles to effective sanitation programs, we're empowering operators, managers, plants, and most importantly, businesses to maintain sanitary plant environments. We've seen how different food types respond to A3 technology and how the information in turn can provide you with the data to improve sanitation practices. And most importantly, we've seen how the data produced by ATP meters is used to improve sanitation programs, and that a critical aspect of sanitation is educating operators and fostering a culture that emphasizes sanitation. We really encourage everyone to try out the LuniTester Smart and experience the A3 technology firsthand. If you're currently using an ATP meter, you'll find that the operation of the LuniTester Smart is very similar to what you're doing now. There's very little in the way of transition when it comes to adopting the LuniTester Smart. If you're not currently using an ATP meter, you'll find that it's very easy to implement and start up using the LuniTester Smart and features within the software. Weber Scientific is a U.S. distributor of LuniTester Smart, and we do have a number of promotions available to get started, even some that include a free meter. We really hope that you found this webinar to be helpful in not only learning about sanitation verification and how it's evolving, but also the importance of sanitation maintaining sanitary practices. With how current events are unfolding, you can see the climate today, you can see the emphasis of quality programs and how they've shifted to sanitation and maintaining a hygienic plant environment. With the features that KIKKKOMAN has implemented, we have the tools to not only give us meaningful data, but to obtain data easily.